The 76-year-old grandmother clutched a faded document worth $500 million while her son begged for money through tearful voicemails. 3 months earlier, he'd handed me rusty cabin keys like charity, calling it simpler living for someone like me. What he didn't know was that cabin held the mineral rights to West Texas oil fields that Exxon just activated. Have you ever been dismissed by family who thought you were finished? Have you watched your own child treat you like a burden while building their dream life? Do you know someone who's been pushed aside by people who should love them most? Today's story reveals what happens when the underestimated strike back. The woman they thought was done had one more hand to play, and it was a royal flush. Stay with me as I show you how one grandmother turned family betrayal into sweet justice. Hit that like button if you've ever felt invisible to people who should love you most. Let me take you back to where this incredible reversal began, in a mansion in Franklin, Tennessee, where my son decided my worth. The day my son handed me those cabin keys, I felt my heart break in ways I didn't know possible. I was sitting in David's pristine living room, all white marble and crystal chandeliers, when he and his wife Olivia exchanged that look. You know the one. The look that says they've been talking about you behind closed doors, making decisions about your life like you're not even there. Mom, David said, his voice too gentle, too practiced. We've been thinking about your situation. My situation. Like I was a problem to solve instead of the woman who raised him, who worked double shifts at the diner to pay for his college, who held him when nightmares kept him awake. Olivia smiled that Instagram-perfect smile of hers, the one that never reached her eyes. She was beautiful in that expensive way. Highlighted hair, designer clothes, manicured nails that had never washed a dish or changed a diaper. Everything about her screamed money, and everything about me screamed small-town Georgia. We found the perfect place for you, she chirped, like she was offering me a vacation instead of exile. It's so peaceful, so authentic. Away from all the noise and stress of city life. David pulled out a set of old keys, brass worn smooth from years of use. I recognized them immediately. They belonged to the cabin in Kentucky that belonged to my late husband Elijah. The same cabin where David used to spend summers as a boy, catching fireflies and listening to his daddy's stories. The cabin? My voice came out smaller than I intended. It needs some work, David admitted, not meeting my eyes. But you always loved it there. And honestly, Mom, this house, it's not really set up for old people, I finished for him. For multiple generations, Olivia corrected smoothly. We're thinking about starting a family soon, and we need the space. Plus, you'll love the quiet. No traffic, no crowds. Just you and nature. Just me and nothing, she meant. Just me in isolation while they built their perfect life in their perfect house with their perfect future children who would never know their grandmother. I took those keys, brass cold against my palm. They felt heavier than they should have, weighted with rejection and broken promises. David hugged me, a quick, guilty squeeze, and Olivia air-kissed my cheek, careful not to mess her lipstick. We'll help you move, David offered. No need, I said, dignity holding my spine straight. I can manage. As I walked to my old Honda in their circular driveway, I caught Olivia watching from the window. She was already redecorating my exile in her mind, probably planning where to put the nursery. I took those keys with dignity, but inside, something shifted. Something that had been sleeping for years woke up angry. They had no idea who they were dismissing. They thought they knew me, sweet old grandma, easy to manage, grateful for scraps. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The 3-hour drive from Franklin to rural Kentucky gave me plenty of time to think, and thinking was dangerous territory. Every mile took me further from their marble paradise and closer to a past I'd tried to leave buried. The highway signs blurred through tears I refused to shed. Not yet. Not while I could still see their pity in my rearview mirror. I'd made this drive hundreds of times when Elijah was alive. Back then, the cabin was our escape from the world, our little slice of heaven where he'd hold me on the porch swing and plan our future. We'd been so young then, so hungry for each other that we'd barely made it through the front door some nights. Now I was making it alone, exiled like some inconvenient relative in a Victorian novel. The landscape changed from suburban sprawl to rolling hills, from chain restaurants to hand-painted signs advertising fresh produce and Jesus. This was my world, the world David had spent his entire adult life trying to escape. And now he'd sent me back to it like a punishment. My phone buzzed against the passenger seat. A text from Olivia: "Hope you have a safe trip. Can't wait to hear how you're settling in." Face blowing a kiss. The emoji made my stomach turn. 20 years ago, I would have appreciated the gesture. Now it felt like salt in an open wound. She was probably already measuring my old bedroom for a crib. The Honda wheezed up the last hill before the turnoff. Poor thing was almost as old as my marriage had been long, but she'd never let me down. Unlike some people I could mention. When I pulled into the gravel drive, my heart did something complicated. The cabin looked worse than I remembered. Shutters hanging crooked, porch sagging like an old woman's shoulders, weeds growing through the steps. But something about it felt like home in ways their mansion never could. This place held real memories. First kisses that tasted like sweet tea in summer. Wedding night passion that left us both breathless and laughing. The morning I told Elijah I was carrying his child, right there on that broken-down porch. David had been conceived in this cabin. Had taken his first steps across these warped floorboards. Had caught his first fish in the creek that ran behind the house. And now he'd dumped me here like unwanted furniture. I sat in the car for a long moment, keys cutting into my palm. Elijah used to say that every ending was just a beginning wearing different clothes. I'd thought it was just one of his sayings, the kind of thing men say when they're trying to sound wise. Maybe he'd been more right than I knew. The cabin waited for me, patient as an old friend. Whatever David and Olivia thought they'd accomplished by sending me here, they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd given me space to think, space to remember who I used to be before I became convenient and quiet. They'd given me room to become dangerous. That first night in the cabin, every shadow held memories. I'd packed light, 2 suitcases and a box of photographs. David had been too polite to say he didn't want cluttering up his perfect house. Everything I owned in the world fit in the back of a 15-year-old Honda. The thought should have depressed me. Instead, it felt like freedom. The electricity still worked, thank God, though the bulbs were dim and flickering. The water ran rust-colored for the first few minutes, then cleared to something that looked almost drinkable. The heating system coughed and wheezed like an old man with emphysema, but it pushed out warm air that smelled like dust and memories. I walked through rooms that time had forgotten. The kitchen where Elijah used to make his famous pancakes, dancing around me in his boxer shorts while coffee percolated on the stove. The bedroom where we'd christened every inch of space during those early years when we couldn't keep our hands off each other. The living room where David had played with wooden toys while rain drummed on the tin roof. Everything was smaller than I remembered, shabbier, like looking at childhood photographs and realizing your heroes were just regular people after all. But there was something else here, something I hadn't expected. Peace. For the first time in months, my shoulders relaxed. No one was watching me, judging my clothes or my old-fashioned ways. No one was speaking in that careful voice people use around the elderly, like we might break if they talked too loud. I unpacked my few belongings, hanging familiar clothes in the bedroom closet that still smelled faintly of Elijah's cologne. Cedar and tobacco and something essentially him that made my chest tight with longing. We'd been married 37 years before the cancer took him, and I still reached for his side of the bed sometimes. The living room centered around an old stone fireplace and Elijah's favorite rocking chair. Solid oak, hand-carved by his grandfather, worn smooth by 3 generations of the men in his family. I'd always loved that chair, the way it held the shape of the people who'd found comfort in it. I made myself a cup of tea from packets I'd brought from David's house, Earl Grey in delicate china cups that Olivia had probably been glad to see go. Settled into Elijah's chair with my tea and really looked around for the first time in years. The cabin was rough around the edges, sure. Floorboards that creaked symphonies when you walked. Windows that let in more cold air than they should. A kitchen that belonged in a museum. But it was honest in a way their marble palace could never be. That first night, as I sat in Elijah's old rocking chair, I heard something creak beneath me that wasn't just old wood. Something that sounded almost like a secret waiting to be discovered. I shifted my weight, listening. There it was again, a sound like hollow space where solid ground should be. Like something hidden beneath layers of time and dust and forgotten dreams. The rocking chair had been Elijah's favorite spot for 40 years. He'd spent countless evenings there, reading newspapers and smoking his pipe, thinking thoughts he never shared. What if he'd been keeping more than thoughts to himself? What if my quiet, predictable husband had been hiding something all along? Sleep didn't come easy that first night. Every sound seemed amplified, whined through loose shutters, mice scurrying in the walls, the house settling into itself like old bones finding comfort. But it was the memory of that strange creak from the rocking chair that kept me awake. By morning, curiosity had won over caution. I made coffee in Elijah's old percolator, the kind that bubbled and hissed and made coffee strong enough to wake the dead. While it brewed, I examined the rocking chair in daylight. Solid oak, just like I remembered, but there was something different about the floorboards beneath it. The wood didn't match. 3 boards running perpendicular to the rest, slightly raised at the edges like they'd been cut and replaced. In 40 years of visiting this cabin, I'd never noticed. But then, I'd never been looking for secrets. I moved the rocking chair, heavier than it looked, groaning across the floorboards like it didn't want to give up its spot. Underneath, the mismatched boards were obvious. Someone had definitely been down there, and recently enough that the cuts still looked clean. My heart started beating faster. Elijah had been full of surprises when we were young. Flowers hidden in my car, love notes tucked in my purse, weekend trips planned in secret. But this felt different. This felt like something he'd hidden even from me. I found a butter knife in the kitchen and worked it into the gap between boards. The wood was loose, lifting easier than it should have after decades of settling. Someone had been here before me, and not too long ago. The boards came up to reveal a metal box, military green and sealed tight against moisture. My hands shook as I lifted it out, heavier than I expected, with something inside that shifted when I moved it. For a moment, I just held it. Once I opened this box, there was no going back to not knowing. Whatever Elijah had hidden down there, he'd kept it secret for a reason. Maybe some secrets were meant to stay buried. But David's dismissive smile flashed through my memory. The way Olivia had looked at me like I was something to be managed, relocated, forgotten. They thought they knew everything about me, about my life, about what I was worth. Maybe it was time I found out what I didn't know about myself. The box opened with a soft click. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, were documents. Legal papers with official seals and signatures, some so old the ink had faded to brown. But the newer ones were crisp and clear, dated just 2 years before Elijah died. My hands shook as I lifted out documents I'd never seen before. Land deeds. Survey maps. Legal agreements with names I didn't recognize and dollar amounts that made my vision blur. Elijah had kept secrets even from me. Big secrets. The kind of secrets that could change everything. At the bottom of the box, in Elijah's careful handwriting on a piece of notebook paper, were 4 words that made my world shift on its axis. For when you're ready. Ready for what? I turned the paper over, looking for more, but that was all he'd left me. 4 words in a box full of papers that might mean nothing or might mean everything. What had my quiet, predictable husband been hiding? Have you ever felt left behind or excluded? Share your thoughts below and let me know what you would do if your family dismissed you like this. Hit that like button if this story is keeping you hooked. I spread those papers across the old kitchen table like I was laying out a jigsaw puzzle, except the picture they made didn't match the man I thought I'd married. Land deeds from West Texas. Survey maps with property lines marked in red ink. Legal agreements with oil companies I'd never heard of, signed in Elijah's neat handwriting. And dates. Lord, the dates went back 30 years. My husband had been wheeling and dealing since before David was born, and I'd never known a thing about it. The coffee grew cold as I read through document after document. Elijah had bought 500 acres of what looked like worthless desert land outside Midland, Texas, back in 1975. The purchase price made me laugh, $12,000 for half a thousand acres. Even back then, that was dirt cheap. But it was the mineral rights paperwork that made my hands shake. Elijah hadn't just bought land. He'd bought everything under it, too. Every drop of oil, every pocket of natural gas, every valuable thing hiding beneath that Texas dirt belonged to him. And when he died, it all became mine. There were photographs tucked between the legal papers, pictures I'd never seen of Elijah standing next to oil derricks, shaking hands with men in cowboy hats and expensive suits. In one photo, he was younger than I remembered him ever being, grinning like he'd won the lottery while pointing at a gushing oil well. Who was this man? The Elijah I married was quiet, steady, predictable. He fixed broken pipes and painted houses and came home every night smelling like sawdust and honest work. He wasn't the kind of man who made secret deals or posed for pictures with oil barons. But here was proof that my quiet husband had been living a double life. The newest documents were dated 2002, just 2 years before the cancer took him. Lease agreements with something called Lone Star Energy, giving them drilling rights in exchange for royalty payments. My name was listed as beneficiary on every single paper. At the bottom of the pile was a letter addressed to me in Elijah's handwriting. My heart pounded as I opened the envelope, recognizing the careful way he formed his letters, the way he pressed too hard with his pen like he was carving words into stone. My dearest wife, it began. If you're reading this, then I'm gone and you've found what I've been keeping from you. Don't be angry with me for the secrets. I wanted to tell you 100 times, but the timing never seemed right. This land was my gift to you, my insurance policy for your future. I bought it with money I saved from construction jobs, penny by penny, because I loved you too much to leave you with nothing. The letter went on, explaining how he'd researched oil production in Texas, how he'd chosen that specific area because geological surveys suggested underground reserves. He'd been patient, holding on to worthless land for decades, waiting for technology to catch up to his hunch. The oil companies will come calling eventually, the letter continued. When they do, don't let them lowball you. You own something precious, something that could change your life. You deserve better than scraping by on Social Security and my small pension. You deserve to live like the queen you've always been to me. I wiped tears off the letter, careful not to smudge his words. Even from the grave, Elijah was taking care of me. While David was shoving me into exile, my dead husband was giving me an empire. The last line of the letter made me smile through my tears. Show them what you're made of, darling. You're stronger than you know. Maybe it was time I found out just how strong that was. 3 days of reading legal documents left me cross-eyed and confused, but one thing was crystal clear: I owned something valuable. How valuable, I couldn't tell from lawyer talk and survey numbers. But valuable enough that Elijah had spent 30 years protecting it. The problem was understanding what I actually owned. These papers were written in a language I didn't speak, all, whereas, and, heretofore, and legal mumbo-jumbo that might as well have been Chinese. I needed help, and I knew exactly where to get it.
Harlan County Courthouse sat in the middle of town like a red brick fortress, the kind of building that had weathered 100 years of local drama. I'd never set foot inside, but desperate times called for desperate measures. The land records office smelled like dust and old paper. Behind a scratched wooden counter sat a young man who looked barely old enough to drive, much less handle legal documents. But when he looked up from his computer and smiled, something in his eyes suggested he knew his business. "Can I help you, ma'am?" I dumped Elijah's papers on the counter like I was laying down a royal flush. "I need to understand what these mean. My husband left them to me, and I can't make heads or tails of the legal talk." The young man, his name tag read Marcus, picked up the first document and his eyebrows shot up toward his hairline. "These are mineral rights deeds. West Texas." "Ma'am, where did you get these?" "My husband bought that land 30 years ago." "Are they still good?" Marcus spread the papers out, his fingers tracing property lines on the survey maps. He pulled up something on his computer, typing in numbers from the legal descriptions. His face grew more serious with each document he examined. "Ma'am, these look legitimate. The signatures, the notary seals, the legal descriptions, everything checks out. And according to our database, there's been recent drilling activity in this area." My heart started beating faster. "Recent drilling?" "Yes, ma'am. Several new wells went active in the last 6 months. The Permian Basin is experiencing a major boom right now. If you own mineral rights in this area." He paused, looking at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "Ma'am, you might want to contact these oil companies soon." He wrote down phone numbers on a piece of paper, his handwriting neat and careful. "These are the main players in that region. But before you call anyone, you should probably get a lawyer. This is serious money we're talking about." Serious money. The words echoed in my head as I drove back to the cabin. David thought he'd parked me somewhere safe and quiet, somewhere I couldn't cause problems or embarrass him. He'd given me keys to exile and told me it was a gift. What he'd actually done was hand me the keys to a kingdom. That night, I sat in Elijah's rocking chair with those phone numbers, thinking about the man who'd loved me enough to buy me a future I'd never dreamed of. He'd worked construction jobs in the Texas heat, saving every extra dollar to purchase land that looked worthless but held treasure. Marcus's words kept running through my mind. Serious money. How serious? Enough to matter? Enough to change things? Enough to make David and Olivia very, very sorry they'd underestimated me? There was only one way to find out. The first phone call changed everything. I'd spent 2 days working up the courage to dial that number Marcus had written down. Lone Star Energy, the company name from Elijah's lease agreements. My hands shook as I pressed the numbers, feeling like I was about to jump off a cliff. Lone Star Energy, Mineral Rights Division, this is Janet speaking. "Hello," I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. "I think I own some land that you're drilling on. In West Texas. My name is Eleanor Patterson, and my husband was Elijah Patterson." Silence on the other end. Then, "Hold please, ma'am. Let me transfer you to Mr. Rodriguez." 3 minutes of hold music later, a man's voice came on the line. Deep, professional, with just a hint of excitement underneath the business tone. "Mrs. Patterson? This is Miguel Rodriguez, Senior Land Manager. We've been trying to reach you for months. Are you calling about the Midland County properties?" Yes. I think so. My husband left me some papers, and I'm trying to understand what they mean. Ma'am, with your permission, I'd like to schedule a meeting. This conversation is too important for a phone call. Are you available this week? This week. Like it was urgent. Like I was important. When was the last time anyone had treated me like I mattered? I suppose I could make time. Excellent. I can drive up to Kentucky if that's easier for you. Would Thursday afternoon work? He wanted to drive to me. A senior executive from an oil company wanted to come to my little cabin to talk about papers I didn't understand. This had to be bigger than I thought. Thursday couldn't come fast enough. I cleaned the cabin like the Queen of England was coming to visit, then realized how silly that was. These were business people, not company. But I put on my best dress anyway, navy blue with tiny flowers, the one I wore to church back when I still went to church. Miguel Rodriguez arrived in a shiny black truck that looked like it cost more than I'd ever made in a year. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 50, with kind eyes and calloused hands that said he'd worked his way up from the ground floor. "Mrs. Patterson, it's a pleasure to finally meet you. Your husband was a smart man. Very smart." We sat at my kitchen table with coffee and store-bought cookies while he spread out maps covered in colored dots and numbers. Red dots for active wells. Blue dots for planned drilling sites. Green dots for producing wells. "Ma'am, your property sits right in the middle of what we call the sweet spot. The most productive section of the entire play. He pulled out a tablet and showed me production numbers, royalty calculations, projections for the next 5 years. The numbers kept getting bigger until they stopped making sense. "Mrs. Patterson, are you sitting down?" I was, but I gripped the edge of the table anyway. "Yes. Based on current production and planned expansion, your annual royalty payments should be somewhere in the neighborhood of $40 million. The coffee cup fell from my hand, shattering on the kitchen floor. $40 million. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire I couldn't put out. Miguel kept talking, something about peak production and long-term projections and tax implications, but all I could hear was that number echoing in my head. $40 million. Per year. "Mrs. Patterson? Are you all right?" I looked down at the broken coffee cup, ceramic pieces scattered across linoleum that had seen better decades. This morning, I'd been worried about whether my Social Security check would cover groceries. Now this man was telling me I was richer than some small countries. "I think I need to sit down." "You are sitting down, ma'am." "Then I need to lie down." Miguel reached across the table and touched my hand. His skin was warm and solid, proof that this wasn't some crazy dream brought on by too much coffee and not enough sleep. "I know it's a shock. But Mrs. Patterson, this is just the beginning. We have geological surveys showing reserves that could produce for decades. Conservative estimates put your total mineral rights value at somewhere around $800 million. $800 million. The number was so big it didn't feel real. People like me didn't have $800 million. People like me clipped coupons and shopped at thrift stores and felt guilty about buying name-brand cereal. Are you sure you have the right person? I'm nobody special." Miguel smiled, the kind of smile that said he'd had this conversation before. "Mrs. Patterson, you're the sole owner of mineral rights to 500 acres in the most productive oil field in North America. That makes you very special indeed." He pulled out another set of papers. Contracts and agreements that would formalize the relationship between me and Lone Star Energy. "Standard terms," he said, though nothing about this felt standard to me. "Now, there are some things we need to discuss. Tax implications, for one. You'll need a good accountant, probably a financial advisor. And legal representation, someone who specializes in mineral rights law." I nodded along, but inside I was thinking about David. About the way he'd handed me those keys like he was doing me a favor. About Olivia's fake smile and air kisses and the way she'd already started planning what to do with my old bedroom. They thought they'd gotten rid of me. Parked me somewhere safe and quiet where I couldn't embarrass them or complicate their perfect life. They'd exiled me to poverty and isolation while they lived in their marble palace. What they'd actually done was hand me the keys to more money than they'd ever see in 10 lifetimes. "Mrs. Patterson, I have to ask. Do your family members know about this inheritance?" "No," I said, my voice steadier than it had been all day. "They have no idea. You might want to think about how and when you tell them. This kind of wealth, it changes relationships. People you thought you knew might surprise you." "Oh, I was counting on it." Miguel left me with a folder full of documents and business cards for lawyers and accountants in 3 different states. He also left me with his personal cell phone number and instructions to call him day or night if I had questions. "One more thing, Mrs. Patterson. The first royalty payment will be direct deposited into your account within 30 days. Based on current production, that should be about $3.2 million. $3.2 million. As a monthly payment. More money than David made in 5 years, hitting my checking account every single month." After Miguel left, I sat in Elijah's rocking chair and laughed until tears ran down my cheeks. My quiet, predictable husband had been anything but quiet and predictable. He'd been a genius, a visionary, a man who'd loved me enough to buy me a future that would make kings jealous. And David, poor, stupid David, had just given me the perfect place to plan exactly how I was going to enjoy my revenge. Share in the comments, what would you do if you suddenly discovered you were worth millions? Hit that subscribe button if you want to see how this grandmother handles her newfound power. The first night after Miguel's visit, I didn't sleep a wink. I sat in that rocking chair until sunrise, thinking about power and revenge and the look on David's face when he realized what he'd done. $800 million. The number had settled into my bones now, real as arthritis and twice as warming. I owned more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, and my son had no idea. But what to do with that knowledge? That was the question that kept me awake. Part of me wanted to call David right then, wake him up at 3 in the morning and tell him exactly how badly he'd miscalculated. Watch his world crumble the same way mine had when he handed me those keys like charity. But that would be too easy. Too quick. Revenge was a dish best served cold, and I'd had plenty of time to let mine freeze solid. No, David deserved something special. Something that would let him understand, really understand, what it felt like to be dismissed and forgotten. Something that would teach him the value of treating people with respect. I made myself coffee and toast as the sun came up, planning my strategy like a general preparing for battle. The beauty of my situation was that I held all the cards now. David thought he knew everything about me, poor old mom, living on Social Security, grateful for any scraps of attention he threw my way. He was about to learn how wrong he was. First, I needed professional help. Miguel had given me names of lawyers and accountants, people who specialized in exactly this kind of situation. I'd start there, get my affairs in order, make sure every legal detail was buttoned up tight. Then I'd wait. Let David and Olivia settle into their new life, let them get comfortable with the idea that they'd solved their grandmother problem. Let them plan their perfect future in their perfect house with their perfect children who would never have to deal with inconvenient elderly relatives. Meanwhile, I'd be building something they couldn't imagine. The first royalty check would arrive in 3 weeks. $3.2 million, just to start. More money than David had ever seen in one place, hitting my bank account like a lottery win that would repeat every single month. But I wouldn't tell him about it. Not yet. Let him think I was struggling, scraping by in their gift cabin while they lived in luxury. Let him feel generous and wise and slightly guilty about his old mother managing all alone. And when he finally came asking for help, because men like David always came asking eventually, that's when I'd show my hand. My phone rang, interrupting my planning. David's name on the caller ID made my heart race, but not with the old anxiety. This time, I felt something that might have been anticipation. Hi, Mom. Just checking in. How are you settling in? His voice had that careful tone again, the one that said he was doing his duty as a good son while hoping I wouldn't take up too much of his time. Oh, just fine, honey. Getting used to the quiet. That's good. That's really good. Listen, I know the cabin needs some work, and if you need help with repairs or anything. Perfect. He was already feeling guilty, already looking for ways to ease his conscience without actually doing anything difficult. Don't you worry about me, I said, smiling at a joke he couldn't hear. I think I'm going to be just fine. Better than fine. I was going to be spectacular. The law office in Louisville looked exactly like what I'd imagined rich people's lawyers would look like, all dark wood and leather books and the kind of quiet that cost money to maintain. Sarah Beth Morrison was nothing like what I'd expected, though. Young enough to be my granddaughter, with bright red hair and a handshake that could crack walnuts. But when she looked at my mineral rights documents, her eyes lit up like Christmas morning. Mrs. Patterson, do you understand what you have here? I'm starting to get the picture. She spread the papers across her massive desk, pulling out calculators and legal books and making notes on yellow pads. Every few minutes she'd whistle under her breath or mutter something about unprecedented and lottery ticket. Okay, here's the situation. Your mineral rights are legitimate, properly recorded, and extremely valuable. The oil company is offering standard terms, which in this case means you're going to be very, very wealthy. But we need to talk about protecting that wealth. For the next 2 hours, Sarah Beth walked me through trusts and tax shelters and investment strategies that made my head spin. But the bottom line was simple. I was about to become one of the richest women in Kentucky, and we needed to make sure nobody could take that away from me. Now, about your family situation. You mentioned your son doesn't know about this inheritance? He has no idea. And I'd like to keep it that way for now. Sarah Beth nodded like she'd heard this story before. Family and sudden wealth can be complicated. But Mrs. Patterson, this kind of money is hard to hide. Bank deposits, tax filings, credit reports, there are ways these things leak out. How long can I keep it quiet? With the right precautions? Maybe 6 months. Maybe less if your son is paying attention to your finances. 6 months. That should be plenty of time to let David dig his hole nice and deep. There's something else we should discuss. Your son's financial situation. Do you know anything about his current circumstances? I shook my head. David never talked about money around me, except to hint about how expensive everything was and how hard it was to get ahead. Sarah Beth pulled out a tablet and typed for a few minutes. With your permission, I'd like to run a background check. Standard procedure when we're dealing with this level of wealth. Family members can sometimes become problematic when they find out about inheritances. Go ahead. 20 minutes later, she looked up from her screen with an expression I couldn't quite read. Mrs. Patterson, your son's mortgage company filed foreclosure papers last week. He's behind on payments, credit cards are maxed out, and there's a second mortgage on the house that's also in default. My coffee cup stopped halfway to my lips. Foreclosure? They're broke, Mrs. Patterson. That beautiful house, the perfect life, it's all built on debt. They have maybe 60 days before the bank takes everything. David was broke. My son, who'd exiled me to make room for his perfect life, was about to lose everything. And he had no idea his salvation was sitting in a cabin in Kentucky, planning exactly how generous she was going to be. What would you do if your family was about to lose everything, but they had no idea you could save them? Let me know in the comments below. The phone call started 3 days after my meeting with Sarah Beth. First one came at 7 in the morning, waking me from the deepest sleep I'd had in months. David's name on the caller ID made my stomach twist, but not with the old worry. This time, I felt something that might have been satisfaction. Mom, hi. I hope I didn't wake you. He had, but I wasn't about to make it easy for him. Just getting up, honey. How are you and Olivia? There was a pause, long enough that I could hear him breathing. When he spoke again, his voice had a strain in it I'd never heard before. Actually, Mom, that's why I'm calling. We're going through a bit of a rough patch right now. Nothing serious, just... You know how it is with the economy and everything. The economy. Like his problems were caused by something outside his control instead of the choices he'd made. I'd raised him better than that, but apparently Olivia's influence had taught him to blame everyone except himself. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, David. Is there anything I can do to help? Another pause. Longer this time. I could practically hear him swallowing his pride. Well, actually. I was wondering if maybe. I know you don't have much, but if you had anything saved up, maybe we could work out some kind of loan arrangement. Just temporary, until we get back on our feet. Alone. My son, who'd exiled me to a broken-down cabin because I wasn't worth keeping around, was asking me for money. The same son who thought I was so poor and pathetic that I should be grateful for charity. How much are you talking about, honey? 50,000. I know it sounds like a lot, but we're just having some cash flow issues with the business, and the bank is being difficult about extending our credit line. $50,000. 2 weeks ago, that would have been impossible. It would have been more money than I'd ever had in my life. Now it was what I'd earn in oil royalties in about 4 hours. David, that's more money than I've ever seen in one place. I know, Mom. I know. But maybe you could take out a reverse mortgage on the cabin, or we could help you apply for one of those senior loans. We'd pay you back with interest, I promise. Good interest. Better than any bank would give you. He wanted me to mortgage Elijah's cabin, the same cabin he'd dumped me in like unwanted furniture, so I could loan him money to save his mansion. The irony was so perfect it almost made me laugh. I don't know, David. That sounds awfully complicated for an old woman like me. Mom, please. We're really in trouble here. The mortgage company is threatening foreclosure, and if we lose the house. His voice cracked. Olivia's talking about leaving. She says she didn't sign up for this kind of stress. Ah, there it was. The real reason for the call. His perfect wife was ready to bail at the first sign of financial trouble, and David was panicking. I'm sorry to hear you're having problems, honey. So you'll think about the loan? I looked around the cabin, at Elijah's rocking chair, at the place where I'd found the documents that changed everything, at the simple life they'd forced me into that had turned out to be worth more than their wildest dreams. I'll think about it, I said. Let me see what I can figure out. Thank you, Mom. Thank you so much. I know this is asking a lot. After I hung up, I sat in that rocking chair and smiled. David was desperate enough to ask his exiled mother for help, but still too proud to apologize for exiling me in the first place. This was going to be even more fun than I'd imagined. 2 weeks of David's increasingly desperate phone calls gave me plenty of time to plan exactly how I wanted this confrontation to go. Each call got more frantic than the last. First, it was just financial trouble. Then it was serious financial trouble. By the fourth call, he was talking about bankruptcy and Olivia packing bags and lawyers who specialized in foreclosure defense. But not once, not in any of those conversations, did he apologize for sending me away. Not once did he acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, he'd treated his mother poorly. Every call was about what I could do for him, never about what he'd done to me. Meanwhile, my first royalty check had cleared. $3.2 million, sitting in my checking account like it belonged there. Sarah Beth had set up investment accounts in tax shelters, but I'd kept enough liquid cash to make a statement. The kind of statement David would never forget. I called him on a Thursday morning, when I knew he'd be desperate enough to agree to anything. David? It's your mother. Mom. Please tell me you have good news. Well, I've been thinking about your situation. And I've decided I want to help. The relief in his voice was almost pathetic. Oh, thank God. Mom, you have no idea how much this means to us. But I want to discuss this in person. Face to face. It's too important for a phone conversation. Of course. Absolutely. Do you want us to drive up there? No, honey. I'll come to you. Saturday afternoon. And I'd like to take you and Olivia out to lunch. Somewhere nice. My treat. There was a pause. Your treat? Mom, are you sure you can afford? Let me worry about what I can afford. How about that country club you used to belong to? The one with the nice dining room? Mom, we're not members there anymore. We had to, we couldn't justify the expense. Perfect. Even better than I'd hoped. Then we'll go as my guests. I'll call and make reservations. You'll, what? I said I'll handle it, David. Just be ready at noon on Saturday. And make sure Olivia is there. This concerns both of you. After I hung up, I called the Fairfield Country Club and asked about guest dining privileges. The hostess was polite but firm. Non-members could dine in the main restaurant, but only with a current member as host. Actually, I said, I'd like to inquire about membership. Of course, ma'am. Our initiation fee is currently $50,000, with monthly dues of $1,200. That sounds reasonable. Could I come in tomorrow to fill out an application? Certainly. And ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, how did you hear about our club? My son and daughter-in-law used to be members. David and Olivia Patterson. I believe they had to give up their membership recently due to financial difficulties. Silence on the other end. Then, I see. Well, we'd be happy to discuss membership options with you. Friday afternoon, I drove to the country club in my old Honda, wearing my best dress and carrying a cashier's check for $75,000. The membership director's eyes went wide when I handed over the check, initiation fee, 6 months of dues in advance, and a small cushion for incidentals. Mrs. Patterson, welcome to Fairfield Country Club. Your membership will be active immediately. Saturday couldn't come fast enough. David and Olivia were about to learn exactly what happened when you underestimated Eleanor Patterson. And I was going to enjoy every single second of their shock. Have you ever planned the perfect comeback for someone who wronged you? Share your best revenge story in the comments. Saturday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made everything feel possible. I dressed carefully, not too fancy, but nice enough to belong at the country club. The same navy dress I'd worn to meet Miguel, but this time I paired it with pearls that had been my mother's and shoes that didn't come from a discount store. David and Olivia were waiting in the circular drive when I pulled up in my Honda, looking confused and slightly embarrassed. Olivia wore the kind of outfit that screamed, "I'm trying too hard," designer clothes that probably cost more than my car, but somehow managed to look desperate instead of elegant. "Mom," David said, hugging me with the careful affection of someone who needed something. "You look nice." "Thank you, honey. Shall we go in?" The hostess greeted me by name. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Patterson, your table is ready," and I watched David and Olivia exchange glances. They were trying to figure out how their exiled mother had managed to secure a reservation at a club they couldn't afford to belong to anymore. Our table overlooked the 18th green, with white tablecloths and crystal glasses that caught the afternoon sunlight. It was the kind of place David and Olivia had taken for granted when they could afford it, and now they sat there like visitors in their own former world. "This is lovely, Mom," Olivia said, her voice tight with confusion. "How did you manage to get us a table here?" "Oh, I have my ways," I said, signaling the waiter. "Champagne, please. The good stuff. We're celebrating." "Celebrating what?" David asked. "We'll get to that. First, let's order lunch." I watched them study the menu, saw the way their eyes flicked to the prices. $40 entrees, $15 salads, amounts that used to be nothing to them were now calculations they had to make. Meanwhile, I ordered the most expensive thing on the menu without blinking. "Mom," David said after the waiter left, "about that loan we discussed." "All in good time, honey. First, I want to know how you're really doing. And I want the truth this time." David and Olivia looked at each other, having one of those silent conversations that married couples perfected over time. Finally, David's shoulders sagged. "It's bad, Mom. Really bad. We overextended ourselves with the house, and when the business started struggling. We're looking at foreclosure within 30 days. Olivia's already started packing." "I see. And you thought maybe your old mother could help out with a loan. I know it's asking a lot. I know you don't have much." "Stop right there." I held up my hand, and something in my voice made him go quiet. "You know I don't have much." "David, honey, you have no idea what I have." I reached into my purse and pulled out a bank statement, just 1 page, but it was enough. I slid it across the white tablecloth like I was dealing cards. David picked it up, and I watched his face change. Confusion first, then disbelief, then something that might have been panic. This can't be right. "Mom, this says you have $3.2 million in checking alone. That's just last month's royalty payment from the oil wells." "Oil wells?" Olivia's voice came out as a squeak. "On the land your husband's father bought in Texas 30 years ago. The same land that comes with mineral rights to what turns out to be one of the richest oil fields in North America." David's coffee cup fell from his hands, shattering on the marble floor just like I'd imagined it would. The sound echoed through the dining room, and other diners turned to stare. "That cabin," I continued, my voice steady as stone, "the one you dumped me in because it was simpler living for someone like me? It's sitting on top of mineral rights worth approximately $800 million. Olivia made a sound like a dying bird. David just stared at the bank statement like it might change if he looked hard enough. "So yes, David, I can help you with that $50,000 loan you need. In fact, I could pay cash for 10 houses just like yours and still have money left over for groceries. The silence stretched between us like a canyon. Finally, David found his voice. Mom, we didn't know. We had no idea. No, I said, folding the bank statement and putting it back in my purse. You didn't. But that's not the real problem, is it? The real problem was that even now, even knowing what they knew, neither David nor Olivia had apologized for treating me like unwanted baggage. David sat there staring at his broken coffee cup while Olivia calculated numbers in her head. I could practically see the dollar signs spinning in her eyes. But not one word about being sorry. Not one acknowledgement that they'd treated me wrong. Mom, David finally said, his voice careful and controlled, we need to talk about this. About managing this kind of wealth. You'll need financial advisors, tax specialists. I'll need? I laughed, and it came out sharper than I intended. David, honey, I've already taken care of all that. I have lawyers, accountants, investment managers. I've had them for weeks. Weeks? Olivia spoke for the first time since the revelation. You've known about this for weeks and didn't tell us? The accusation in her voice made something cold settle in my chest. Even now, faced with proof of her own mistakes, she was making this about what I owed them. I've known about it exactly as long as I've been living in the cabin you sent me to. The cabin you gave me the keys to like you were doing me some great favor. We thought we were, David said, desperation creeping into his voice. We thought the quiet would be good for you. You thought I was a burden. You thought I was too old, too poor, too embarrassing to live in your perfect house with your perfect life. That's not true. Isn't it? I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the photos I'd taken of text messages between David and Olivia, messages I'd seen on Olivia's phone when she left it on the kitchen counter during my last visit. Messages Sarah Beth's investigator had helped me retrieve. Should I read these out loud, David? The ones where Olivia calls me the old bat, and you agree that I'm becoming too much to handle? Or maybe the one where you both laugh about shipping me off to the middle of nowhere so I can't interfere with your social life? David's face went white. Olivia started crying, not the pretty kind of crying you see in movies, but the ugly, desperate kind that smeared her makeup and made her look older. We were stressed, she sobbed. The finances, the pressure, we said things we didn't mean. Oh, but you did mean them. That's exactly the problem. I stood up, leaving my lunch half finished on the expensive china. Here's what's going to happen. David, I will help you with your financial problems. Not because you deserve it, but because I loved your father and I remember the little boy you used to be before you became this. Mom, thank you, I'm not finished. My voice cut through his gratitude like ice. I'll pay off your house, clear your debts, set up a trust fund that will keep you comfortable for life. But there are conditions. I pulled an envelope from my purse, documents Sarah Beth had prepared for exactly this moment. You'll get $2 million. Total. That's enough to pay your debts and live comfortably if you're smart about it. But the bulk of my wealth goes into a charitable foundation. A foundation that helps elderly people who've been abandoned by their families. David stared at the envelope like it might bite him. 2 million. More than you had yesterday. More than you deserve today. Take it or leave it. Olivia grabbed the envelope before David could answer, her tears forgotten in the face of financial salvation. Some people never learned. But at least now I knew exactly who I was dealing with. 6 months later, I was sitting on my cabin porch watching the sunrise over Kentucky hills, holding a cup of coffee that cost more per pound than most people spent on groceries in a week, but somehow tasted exactly like the cheap stuff I'd always drunk. Funny how money changed everything except the things that mattered. David had taken the 2 million, of course. Paid off his debts, kept the house, even managed to patch things up with Olivia once the financial pressure disappeared. He called me every week now, dutiful as a son should be, but there was something different in his voice. Something careful and calculated that hadn't been there before. He knew I had power now, and he was afraid of losing access to it. Olivia sent cards, birthday cards, holiday cards, thinking of you cards with handwritten notes about how much they missed me. All of them felt like job applications, requests to stay in my good graces just in case I changed my mind about the inheritance. They'd learned to value me, but for all the wrong reasons. The Eleanor Patterson Foundation for Elderly Care had opened offices in 12 states, providing housing assistance, medical care, and legal advocacy for seniors who'd been forgotten by their families. Every month, I read thank you letters from grandparents who'd been given a second chance, who'd found dignity after abandonment. It was Elijah's real gift to me, not just the money, but the ability to turn pain into purpose. Sarah Beth visited sometimes, bringing legal documents and investment reports that showed my wealth growing despite everything I'd given away. Oil prices had spiked, new wells had come online, and the land Elijah bought for pennies was now worth more than some countries' entire budgets. You could have kept it all, she told me during her last visit. Lived like royalty for the rest of your life. And done what with it? Count it? Look at it? Money's only worth what you do with it. She smiled, the same smile she'd given me that first day in her office when she realized I wasn't going to be a typical client. Your husband would be proud. I thought about Elijah sometimes, wondered if he'd known what would happen when I found those documents. Had he planned this exact scenario, or just hoped I'd be strong enough to handle whatever came my way? Either way, he'd been right about one thing: I was stronger than I knew. My phone buzzed. A text from David: Mom, Olivia's pregnant. We wanted you to be the first to know. A grandchild. After all these years, after everything that had happened, David was giving me a grandchild. I looked around the cabin, at Elijah's rocking chair where I'd found my fortune, at the simple kitchen where I'd learned I was worth more than kings, at the porch where I'd watched my whole world change. This baby would grow up knowing their grandmother was powerful, knowing that respect wasn't something you gave conditionally, knowing that underestimating quiet people was the biggest mistake you could make. I texted back, congratulations. Let me know when you want to start the college fund. Because that's what grandmothers do. We love our children's children even when our children disappoint us. We build futures for people who haven't been born yet. We plant trees whose shade we'll never sit in. The door clicked shut behind me as I went inside to start planning a nursery fund. Not because David and Olivia deserved it, but because their child did. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't hurting the people who hurt you, it's becoming so successful that their opinion of you stops mattering. I'd learned that sometimes being underestimated is the greatest gift life can give you. It lets you surprise people when they least expect it. And Eleanor Patterson was full of surprises. Thanks for watching. If Helen's journey inspired you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of transformation. Tell me in the comments, what would you do with $500 million and a family that dismissed you? Remember, the most powerful people aren't always the loudest ones. Sometimes they're the quiet ones who've been planning their comeback all along.